Imagine this, you're working a late shift at a luxury restaurant when a billionaire at one of your tables starts mocking you in a language he assumes you can't understand. The whole room laughs along, and you feel invisible. But then, in front of everyone, you open your mouth and respond so flawlessly, in his own language, that the billionaire's smirk vanishes, and the entire restaurant goes silent. Tonight, we're telling the story of how one young waitress taught a billionaire the most unforgettable lesson of his life. "Can you believe what he just said?" whispered one diner to another, eyes widening in disbelief. It was a quiet evening inside La Belle Étoile, one of Berlin's most prestigious five-star restaurants. Crystal chandeliers glittered above white linen tables, violins played softly in the background, and every guest inside seemed wrapped in an air of sophistication. This was the kind of place where wealthy elites came not just for food, but for status. At one corner table sat Karl Reinhardt, a man everyone in the city knew by name. He wasn't just rich, he was a billionaire with a reputation for being ruthless in business and arrogant in public. His sharp suits and expensive watches always made a statement, but so did his biting words. Tonight, he was entertaining a business partner from London, and as always, he had to prove he was the smartest and most powerful man in the room. When the waitress approached his table, Karl leaned back casually in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. His eyes flicked up and down, landing on the young woman standing before him. Her name was Amara. She was new at the restaurant, just a few weeks into the job. She carried herself with calm professionalism, shoulders straight, hands steady as she balanced the tray. Her uniform was spotless, her voice polite, her smile warm. To anyone else, she was exactly what the restaurant demanded of its staff, elegance mixed with humility. But Karl didn't see that. Instead, he smirked and muttered in German to his companion, his voice low enough that he thought only his table would hear. "Look at this, they'll hire anyone these days. She probably doesn't even know what fork goes with the salad." His words, dipped in condescension, slid out like poison. His companion chuckled awkwardly, glancing at Amara as if she were invisible. The insult was subtle, hidden beneath the comfort of a foreign language. Karl assumed she couldn't possibly understand him. After all, she wasn't German, her accent, her complexion, her very presence made him assume she was out of place in his world of wealth and privilege. But Karl was wrong. Amara had heard every word. Not only had she understood, she had caught the smug tone, the superiority laced in his voice. Her heart gave a small jolt, but her expression didn't change. Years of discipline and training had taught her how to keep her composure under pressure. She had faced worse, backhanded comments, patronizing stares, even open prejudice. But still, it stung. What Karl didn't know was that Amara wasn't just a waitress. She was a graduate student in linguistics, pursuing her master's degree in Berlin. She spoke 5 languages fluently: English, French, Italian, Spanish, and yes, perfect German. She had grown up in Ghana, studied in the United States, and moved to Germany to continue her education. Waitressing was simply a way to help pay her tuition. To Karl, she was someone beneath him. To Amara, this was just another job, a stepping stone to something far greater. She stood silently for a moment, watching him through calm eyes. On the inside, she wrestled with her choices. Should she confront him? Should she let it slide? Part of her wanted to defend herself immediately, to shatter his assumptions right then and there. But another part reminded her, control is power. She had seen men like Karl before, wealthy, arrogant, dismissive. People who assumed money gave them the right to belittle others. She knew that if she lost her temper, if she reacted with anger, she would only confirm the narrow picture he had painted of her. But if she stayed calm, if she let her intelligence do the talking at the right moment, the effect would be far greater. Her grip on the tray tightened ever so slightly, but her voice was steady when she asked in English. "Would you like to hear tonight's specials, sir?" Karl barely looked at her. "Just bring us the Chateau Margaux 2015. And don't take too long." He waved her off dismissively, as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. Amara gave a polite nod and turned away, but inside, a quiet fire had been lit. She wasn't just going to let this pass. She knew there would be a moment, an opportunity, to remind Karl Reinhardt of a lesson he had clearly forgotten: respect costs nothing. As she walked toward the kitchen, she replayed his words in her mind, not with hurt, but with determination. She remembered the countless hours she had spent perfecting her German, the pride she had felt when her professors praised her fluency, the long nights she had studied so she could stand out in a foreign country. And now, this man thought she didn't even know how to handle a fork. The irony was almost laughable. Karl, for all his wealth and influence, had just underestimated the one person who was more than capable of humbling him, quietly, intelligently, and in his own language. And soon, very soon, he was going to find out. Amara wasn't just any waitress. She was far more than the crisp black and white uniform she wore, more than the polite smile she offered to every guest who entered the restaurant. Behind those calm eyes was a young woman with dreams as wide as the world itself. She was a graduate student in linguistics, a field she had pursued with unshakable passion. Language had always fascinated her: how it connected people, how it carried culture, how it gave identity. By the time she reached her early 20s, Amara was fluent in 5 languages: English, French, Italian, Spanish, and German. Each one represented countless hours of study, late nights with textbooks, and endless practice. Her journey hadn't been easy. Amara had grown up in Ghana, in a modest household where education was considered a golden ticket to opportunity. Her parents worked tirelessly, and they instilled in her the belief that knowledge was the one thing no one could take away. When she earned a scholarship to study in the United States, she grabbed the chance, excelling at every stage. But she wasn't done. Her curiosity about European languages pulled her next to Berlin, where she had been accepted into a competitive master's program. That's why she was here, in this glittering restaurant. Not because she wanted to be a waitress forever, but because she needed to pay her tuition, her rent, and her bills. The job was simply a stepping stone. Most nights, she handled the work with grace and professionalism. The long hours didn't bother her; she had learned endurance from her childhood. What stung, however, were moments like this, moments when someone like Karl Reinhardt, sitting in luxury, assumed she was beneath him. She had never expected to face such blatant disrespect so casually dropped in her presence. As she stood near Karl's table, her tray balanced effortlessly in her hands, she listened to him mock her. His words, sometimes in English, sometimes in German, rolled out with arrogance, as if he were performing for his companion. The tone was unmistakable: superiority, entitlement, the belief that money gave him the right to sneer at those he considered unimportant. One moment, he'd say in English, "Service here has gone downhill," glancing at Amara like she wasn't standing right there. The next moment, he'd switch to German, chuckling to his guest about how she probably doesn't even know the difference between Riesling and Chardonnay. He thought he was clever. He thought his private insults were safe in the comfort of his mother tongue. But Amara knew better. She understood every word. And though her heart gave a small sting at each jab, her face remained calm. Her posture stayed perfect. She had mastered the art of composure. Years of moving between cultures, proving herself in academic circles, and dealing with people who underestimated her had taught her one thing: losing your temper means losing control. So she didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes or tighten her jaw. Instead, she listened. She absorbed every word, every smug chuckle, every glance. Inside her mind, however, a storm brewed. She could feel 2 sides of herself arguing. One side whispered, "Ignore him. He's just another arrogant man. You've dealt with this before. Why waste your energy?" The other side, stronger and louder, countered, "No. This isn't just rudeness. This is a test of your dignity. You can't let him believe he's right. You can't let him walk away thinking you're blind to his words. For a moment, Amara weighed her options carefully. She knew what was at stake. A confrontation could backfire. If she lost her temper, she could risk her job. But silence felt like surrender, and Amara had never been the type to surrender her self-respect. Her decision crystallized with startling clarity. This was no longer about carrying plates and pouring wine. This was about character. Karl Reinhardt might have billions, but that didn't give him the right to strip others of dignity. If anything, his wealth should have come with humility. Instead, it had given him arrogance. And Amara was not about to let herself become another invisible victim of that arrogance. Her lips pressed into the faintest of smiles, not one of amusement, but of quiet determination. She knew something Karl didn't. She could fight back without ever raising her voice, without ever breaking the rules of her job. She had an advantage he couldn't even imagine. Because while he mocked her in German, assuming she didn't understand, she was already preparing her response, in German so fluent, so polished, it would freeze him in place. Amara straightened her shoulders, steadied her breathing, and waited for the perfect moment. She wasn't going to lash out impulsively. No, she would wait until Karl was most confident in his cruelty, most certain of his superiority. And then, she would show him exactly who he was dealing with. For Amara had already decided, she wasn't about to let a billionaire walk all over her. When Karl's business partner glanced at the wine list and asked a casual question, it should have been an ordinary moment. Just a customer inquiry, just another chance for Amara to do her job. But to her, this was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the moment to strike back with quiet dignity. She leaned forward, tray still balanced gracefully in one hand, and spoke. Not in English. Not in the clipped phrases most staff used to keep things simple. No, Amara opened her mouth and let out a stream of flawless, elegant German. Her tone was smooth, the kind you'd expect from a university lecturer, not from someone serving food. Her pronunciation was sharp, refined, polished to perfection. And her vocabulary was advanced, so advanced that even Karl's business partner, who was German himself, raised his eyebrows in surprise. She explained every detail of the wine, from the vineyard's history to the subtle notes of oak and berry, weaving in cultural references that only a well-educated speaker would know. The effect was immediate. The entire table froze. Karl's smirk evaporated as if it had been wiped off his face. His fork, still in his hand, slipped from his grip and clattered noisily against the fine china. The sound turned heads from nearby tables. His eyes darted to his companion, then back to Amara, struggling to process what had just happened. The arrogant assumption he had carried, the belief that she was uneducated, unrefined, unworthy, had shattered in an instant, right there in front of witnesses. But Amara wasn't done. She let the silence hang for a beat, then seamlessly shifted into another language. "Et vous préférez un vin plus doux," she continued in perfect French, "Je vous recommande les sauternes. C'est un choix délicat, très apprécié avec les desserts." Her voice was confident, almost musical, carrying across the table and into the air of the hushed restaurant. Then, without skipping a breath, she slipped into Italian. "A pure, se desidera un vino con più carattere, abbiamo un barolo magnifico, robusto, elegante, indimenticabile." The transition was effortless, like a concert pianist changing keys mid-performance. Karl's business partner was staring at her in astonishment now. Other diners had begun to take notice, their conversations pausing as they listened. Heads tilted, whispers spread across the room. Who was this waitress? Finally, Amara returned to German, her eyes locking onto Karl's. Her voice lowered, steady and unshakable, carrying a weight far heavier than volume could achieve. "Respekt ist kostenlos, Herr Reinhardt," she said. "Violite sollten Sie es irgendwann ausprobieren." Respect is free, sir. Perhaps you should try it sometime. The words landed like a stone dropped in water, rippling outward, impossible to ignore. The restaurant went completely silent. Even the violinist in the corner seemed to hesitate on his bow, the music faltering for just a moment. Guests nearby leaned in, their faces lit with curiosity. A few diners, catching the meaning of her words, exchanged knowing glances. Some even began clapping softly, as if unable to contain their admiration. The color drained from Carl's face, then returned in a furious red. His arrogance, his smug certainty, all of it had been ripped away and replaced with something he hadn't felt in years: embarrassment. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time in a long time, the billionaire who always had a sharp comment or cutting remark found himself utterly speechless. His business partner shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between loyalty and awe. The man cleared his throat and muttered, "Impressive, very impressive," but Carl didn't respond. He couldn't. Every eye in the room seemed fixed on him now, waiting to see what he would do. The power he had so confidently displayed earlier had dissolved, leaving him exposed. And Amara? She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't rub it in. She simply straightened her shoulders, gave a polite nod, and carried herself with the same calm professionalism she had shown all evening. Her dignity spoke louder than anger ever could. Carl, on the other hand, sat frozen in his chair, face burning, hands fidgeting uselessly with his napkin. He had been humbled in the one place he thought himself untouchable: his language, his world of refinement, his shield of superiority. The whispers grew louder. "Did you hear what she said?" one diner murmured. "She speaks like a scholar," another replied. It was a rare moment where the balance of power shifted entirely, not through wealth, not through status, but through intelligence and poise. And Carl Reinhardt, the billionaire who mocked others so easily, had just been taught the simplest lesson of all. Carl Reinhardt was not used to being humbled, certainly not in public. His entire reputation was built on dominance, on walking into any room and commanding attention with his wealth, his connections, and his cutting remarks. For decades, people had bowed to him, laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, and tolerated his arrogance because of the power he wielded. But that night, in that glittering Berlin restaurant, all of it cracked. Here he was, completely exposed, not by another billionaire, not by a rival executive, not by a politician, but by a young black waitress he thought he could mock without consequence. The irony of it gnawed at him. His weapon had always been words, yet hers were sharper, smarter, and far more devastating. His business partner shifted uneasily in his seat, glancing between Carl and Amara. The silence was unbearable. The man leaned in and whispered under his breath, "Carl, maybe, you should apologize." For a moment, Carl resisted. He had never apologized to anyone of lower status in his life. Apologies, to him, were a sign of weakness. Yet now, every pair of eyes in the room seemed to bore into him, demanding accountability. His usual armor of arrogance was gone, replaced with something foreign: shame. He cleared his throat, the sound strained and awkward. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to regain composure. Finally, in halting English, he muttered, "My apologies. I didn't realize." The words fell flat. They weren't sincere, and everyone could tell. It was the kind of apology meant to save face, not to show real regret. But Amara didn't react with anger. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't scoff, didn't call him out further. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She simply smiled politely, as if nothing had happened, and carried on with her work. She poured the wine with steady hands, placed the dishes with quiet grace, and moved to the next table as though Carl Reinhardt's humiliation was of no concern to her. That quiet dignity hit harder than any heated argument ever could. Her composure wasn't just professionalism, it was a statement. His words had no power over her. The restaurant buzzed with whispers. Diners leaned toward one another, recounting what they had just witnessed. Some tried to record the aftermath discreetly, snapping photos, while others rushed to share the story on social media before dessert even arrived. By the end of the night, the incident was already spreading. Tweets appeared under trending hashtags. Billionaire mocks black waitress in German, gets schooled in front of everyone. Never underestimate people. She destroyed him in 3 languages. That waitress is a queen. Absolute queen. Clips, typed-up accounts, and overheard quotes circulated online. Some users applauded Amara's intelligence and composure, others turned Carl into the punchline of countless jokes and memes. One viral post read, "Imagine being a billionaire and still getting humbled by someone who earns in a month what you spend on a tie." By the following morning, news outlets had picked up the story. Local Berlin papers framed it as a lesson in humility. International blogs praised Amara for standing her ground without losing her professionalism. Even professors in linguistic circles shared her story, calling it a testament to the power of education and resilience. Meanwhile, Karl Reinhardt's name trended for all the wrong reasons. His carefully cultivated image of sophistication and superiority was torn apart in hours. Where he once demanded admiration, he now faced ridicule. For a man who valued reputation above all, this was a nightmare. But Amara? She didn't seek the spotlight. She didn't post about the encounter or try to cash in on the sudden attention. She continued working her shifts, focusing on her studies, quietly grateful that her years of hard work had spoken for themselves when it mattered most. The restaurant's manager later pulled her aside and thanked her personally. "You handled yourself better than most people ever could," he said. Her colleagues beamed with pride. Customers who had witnessed the exchange returned later, requesting to be seated in her section, just so they could be served by the waitress who silenced a billionaire. What Karl had intended as an insult became the very stage where Amara's brilliance shone. In the end, the story carried a lesson that resonated far beyond the walls of that restaurant: never underestimate people. Respect isn't something earned through wealth or titles, it's something you give freely, because every person, regardless of their job or background, deserves it. Karl Reinhardt learned that the hard way. And Amara? She walked away from that night with her head held high, a quiet reminder to the world that dignity, intelligence, and self-control can outshine even the wealth of a billionaire. Days later, Amara walked into the restaurant for another shift, expecting nothing more than a routine evening. But this time, her manager pulled her aside before she could even change into her uniform. His expression wasn't stern or critical, instead, his eyes shone with genuine pride. "Amara," he said warmly, "I just wanted to thank you. What you did the other night, the way you handled yourself, it was extraordinary. You didn't just represent this restaurant with professionalism, you inspired everyone who was here to witness it." The words caught Amara off guard. She had only done what felt right in the moment. She hadn't thought of herself as heroic, just as someone unwilling to be belittled. Yet the impact of her actions was much greater than she imagined. Within days, she had become more than just another waitress in Berlin. She had become a symbol. Colleagues who once saw her as quiet and reserved now looked at her with admiration. Guests returned to the restaurant, not for the food, but hoping to meet the waitress who spoke 5 languages, and humbled one of the city's most arrogant billionaires. And soon, the recognition spread far beyond the restaurant's walls. Emails began arriving at the manager's office, addressed specifically to Amara. A law firm sought her skills as a translator. A local university invited her to give a talk on the power of language and identity. An international NGO reached out, offering her paid opportunities to use her multilingual talents to connect communities across borders. The most surprising of all was a scholarship proposal, funding that could cover the rest of her studies entirely. For years, Amara had balanced work and school with little sleep, stretching every euro to make ends meet. Now, doors she never thought would open were suddenly within reach. Her life was beginning to change, all because she had chosen not to let disrespect define her. Meanwhile, Karl Reinhardt's world had shifted in the opposite direction. The billionaire avoided the restaurant completely after that night. People whispered that he was too ashamed to show his face there again. The story of his humiliation had traveled quickly, amplified by social media, newspapers, and television commentary. For a man obsessed with reputation, the fallout was brutal. Some of his business partners distanced themselves quietly, worried that his arrogance had made him careless. Younger entrepreneurs mocked him online, turning him into a symbol of outdated elitism. He wasn't ruined, after all, he still had his wealth, but his polished image had been cracked beyond repair. Karl had always thought of respect as something others owed him because of his money. Now he realized that respect could not be bought, it had to be earned. And once lost, it was nearly impossible to regain. The contrast between Amara and Karl could not have been sharper. She had no wealth, no status, no influence, but she carried herself with dignity, intelligence, and confidence. He had all the wealth in the world, yet when stripped of arrogance, he had nothing to stand on. The powerful moment carried a universal truth. Never underestimate people. Respect has no price tag. It reminded everyone who heard the story that every human being, no matter their job or background, carries their own strength, their own knowledge, their own story. You never know who you're speaking to, and you never know the battles they've fought to stand where they are. Amara proved this in the most unexpected way. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to insult Karl back. Her calm, fluent command of multiple languages did all the speaking for her. And when she looked him in the eye and said, "Respect is free, sir. Perhaps you should try it sometime," she delivered a line that the world would remember. Because sometimes, the most powerful comebacks aren't dramatic speeches. They aren't arguments shouted in anger. They aren't fueled by insults or revenge. The most powerful comeback is the one spoken with calm authority, the one that exposes arrogance without lowering yourself to its level. Amara's story became more than just a viral moment. It became a reminder of what true strength looks like, not wealth, not status, but character. And so, while Karl Reinhardt faded quietly from that chapter of the city's social scene, Amara's light only grew brighter. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, she was a symbol of dignity, a voice of resilience, and proof that intelligence will always outshine arrogance. Her story left one lasting lesson echoing across dinner tables, classrooms, and boardrooms alike. The richest person in the room isn't the one with the biggest bank account. It's the one who carries respect, both for themselves and for others. And that's the story of how one young woman's calm intelligence humbled a billionaire in front of everyone. It just goes to show, you should never underestimate anyone, no matter their background or job. What did you think of Amara's response? Do you believe Karl really learned his lesson, or will people like him never change? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next inspiring story we share. Thanks for watching, and remember, true power doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from respect.